The Dungeon Crashers are back. We've had a little hiatus. First, my daughter got married, and I spent that weekend walking her down the aisle. And of course, all the other wedding details. And of course, Uncle's appeal had to be there as well. Then a portion of the wedding party, including me, got COVID. Then D&D 2024 Player's Handbook came out, and Zapiel and I took some time to get familiar with the changes, and now we're ready to go. Our group just started playing with the new rules, and so far we like them, but we've already found things that need to house roll, but that's been the case with every version of D&D we played since the beginning. Starting out, we're going to do some single class characters because we want to highlight all the new changes to the classes and subclasses. We're going to begin with the two classes that we think have changed the most, Paladin and Monk, and today we're doing the Paladin. Hi everyone, and welcome to a new and improved episode of The Dungeon Crashers. I'm Guy.
And I'm Zapiel. Before we get started, please like our video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our exciting D&D content. If you are new to the channel, feel free to take a look at some of our older videos. We are all about building characters. We aren't devoted to power building, although we do that from time to time. We are more about making versatile and well-rounded characters that are fun to play and fit the backstory and personality that give role-playing ideas. We also include power building tricks in a lot of our builds to give them a little extra edge. Our philosophy in our game is that every character should have a role in and out of combat so that no one is left out. We also think every character should have some ability to support the rest of their party, even if they aren't a dedicated support character. This can be as simple as using the Magic Initiate feat to get Healing Word on an Arcane caster so they can back up a cleric, or use the Inspiring Leader or Musician feat on a non-caster to let them provide inspiration or temporary hit points. As Guy said, we are starting our exploration of the 2024 Player's Handbook with the Paladin. It received a big nerf to its power level. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. As much as I love 5e paladins, they could get boring. They would often unload all their power in one or two fights and then be limping along until they can get a long rest. The changes give the paladin some extra staying power and also discourage them from burning up all their smites in a single encounter. We aren't sure if we like how they did it, and we will discuss it when we get into the character, but we do like the effect of the change. Guy is one of the Paladin players in our group, so he is doing the nuts and bolts of this build, while I, being the Monk player, will handle the Monk next week. Not only have the classes have changed, but backgrounds and races. Now called lineages, we have seen some big changes, and we will talk about those when we get to them. For lineage, we are using the Wood Elf. In 5e, one of the best reasons to play a Wood Elf, at least in our group, is the Mask of the Wild. The ability to hide while lightly obscured is great for rogues, rangers, monks, and anyone else who wanted to be stealthy. The new Wood Elf has lost this and had it replaced with the Druidcraft cantrip, which I'm sure exactly no one is excited about. If they had made it like they did with the High Elf, where you can change it to a different Druid cantrip after each long rest, it would be great, and that is exactly what we are doing in our home game. But for this video, our character is stuck with Druidcraft. Wood Elves are humanoid, and they have a walking speed of 35 feet. They have dark vision out to 60 feet. They still have Fey ancestry, giving them advantage on saves to avoid the charmed condition. They also have keen senses, which has improved. Now, instead of proficiency with perception, you can choose perception, insight, or survival. In my opinion, perception is one of the best choices. It is the most commonly rolled skill in our game, and getting it for free is nice, but there might be situations where you want insight or survival and can't get it from your class or background. And in those cases, this will be nice. They also still have trance, letting them complete a long rest by meditating for 4 hours, and they can't be put to sleep with magic. They start knowing the Druidcraft cantrip, and at 3rd level, they learn the Long Strider spell, and at 5th level, they learn Pass Without a Trace. They can cast these spells once per long rest without using a spell slot, and can cast them with any spell slots they have. Druidcraft is a fluff spell. It is fun for roleplay, but barely comes in handy. In our game, we are allowing it to be changed to any druid cantrip after each long rest, the same way High Elves do with Prestidigitation and wizard cantrips. Long Strider is a good spell to have, and the free use once a day will encourage you to use it. Pass Without a Trace is definitely the star here. It is one of the best stealth spells in the game, and it will be nice having it on a character that won't get it from their class. Backgrounds have had some major changes. One of these isn't completely new. Backgrounds have been giving feats for a while now in newer publications, but now it is a standard that every background gives a feat. Also, ability score bonuses come from the background now, not the race, or species, or lineages as it is called now. For this character, we are using the guide background. As the name suggests, this is a person who is skilled in guiding other people through the wilderness. It sounds like it would suit rangers or scout rogues, and it would, but it can also be good for a wide variety of characters. It gives bonuses to dexterity, constitution, and wisdom. The new rules let you put a +1 on each of these, or a +2 on one and +1 on another. It gives the Magic Initiate feat for the Druid list, letting you pick 2 cantrips from the Druid list, and we choose Guidance and Starry Wisp. Starry Wisp is a new cantrip that is not only good, it suits a paladin. You can make a ranged spell attack that deals 1d8 radiant damage and causes the target to shed dim light in a 10-foot radius until the end of your next turn, and this prevents it from gaining the benefits of being invisible. You can also choose a first level spell from the Druid list, and you can cast it once a day without using a spell slot, and can cast it with any spell slots you have. And we choose Healing Word. Under the new rules, you can choose Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma as your casting stat for these spells instead of being stuck with the ability that is associated with the spell list. And since we are going to be a paladin, we choose Charisma. This feat gives a lot of value to a paladin. Starry Wisp gives a nice range attack that doesn't require carrying a crossbow or javelins. Guidance is just a good versatile cantrip, and Healing Word is a vital spell and normally not available to paladins. The guide background also gives proficiency with stealth and survival, which this character wants and won't get it from his class. And it also gives proficiency with cartographer's tools, which will be a nice roleplay element, so we are going to make a type of character that would be inclined to make maps and explore new lands.
When I make a single-class paladin, I like to make a Dexadin, which is a dexterity-based paladin. When multiclassing a paladin needs strength, so I intend to go with typical heavy armor and either a heavy weapon or sword and shield. But single-class paladins don't have that restriction, so it's possible to make something more unique. Under the new rules, there is no reason you can't have an elf with massive strength, but I personally would rather play an elf that's graceful and precise. It's also fun to show that there are ways to be a noble hero without being the traditional knight in shining armor. For ability scores, we're using a point buy, and we put 10 on strength. We have a slender elven build, but we aren't weak. We put 15 on dexterity, making it 17 with 2 bonus points. We put 13 on Constitution, making it 14 with the remaining bonus point. We put 10 on both Intelligence and Wisdom. We don't need either, but we don't want negatives. And we put 14 on Charisma. This is his casting stat and powers a lot of his abilities. This is a well-rounded spread of abilities. If we wanted, we could have put an 8 on Strength or Intelligence and made Charisma 15 to boost with a feat later. We could also do the same with Constitution. But there are advantages to being balanced, and it suits the character we're trying to make. Our hero was just a boy, barely over a century old when the humans came. He was a woodsman and spent his time running through the forest, hunting game, gathering berries, and making friends with the wolves. He had no cares in the world. His people lived in peace. Long ago they warred with their dark elf cousins, and while technically the war still continued, there was no fighting, and the hatred between the two peoples was more tradition than reality. Our hero had heard of humans, crude, shaggy creatures, something like pale-skinned hobgoblins, that made stone tools and herded goats. His people had not seen any since centuries before his birth, and didn't consider them a threat. He was very surprised when he saw them marching through the woods. They were like nothing he had seen or heard about. The ones that marched were armored in steel, a secret that our hero had been taught belonged only to the elves and dwarves. They also carried steel swords and steel-tipped spears. Along with the marchers were the riders, mounted on tall horses different from the ponies his lessons had said humans used. Both horse and riders were covered in heavy coats of mail, and the riders carried wicked-looking lances. Another rider was among them as well. This one wore no armor, but carried a staff of the sorts that wizards use, another secret that he thought belonged only to the elves. Our hero approached the riders, seeking to know their business and let them know they were in elven lands. Before he could reach them, they started shouting in their crude tongue and pointing at him. Two of the riders lowered their lances and charged him. He struck one down with a flash of light and drew his blades to fight the other. It only took 2 strokes to fell the rider, but others were advancing, and the humans with the staff was muttering arcane phrases. Knowing he had no chance of victory, our hero fled into the forest, using the dense underbrush to elude his armored foes. Our hero begins play as a paladin, gaining 2 skills from their list, and he chooses athletics and persuasion. He is a fit and well-spoken young elf. Acrobatics would suit him better, but it isn't on the paladin list, and athletics will help him with swimming and climbing, and also helps him resist shoves. He has proficiency with all armor and shields, simple and martial weapons, and wisdom and charisma saves. For equipment, he wears studded leather armor and carries a short sword and a scimitar. He also has a pair of daggers which can be thrown if needed. He gains spellcasting, which is a change from 5th edition, where paladins didn't get spellcasting until 2nd level. He gains 2 first-level spell slots and can prepare 2 spells from the paladin list. This is another change from 5th edition, where he could prepare a number of spells equal to half his paladin level plus his charisma modifier. He also can only change 1 prepared spell after a long rest instead of changing them all. He prepares Divine Favor and Divine Smite. Divine Favor is cast as a bonus action and lasts for 1 minute. During this time, he adds 1d4 damage to every melee attack he makes, and unlike in 5th edition, it no longer requires concentration, making an excellent use of a spell slot. Divine Smite is a spell, and it's the biggest change to the paladin. It is cast as a bonus action immediately after hitting a creature, and deals 2d8 radiant damage, or 3d8 against fiends and undead. When cast in a higher level spell slot, it deals an additional d8 for each spell slot passed first. In 5e, a paladin can simply expend a spell slot to smite any time it hit a target, no action required. Now, having to cast Smite as a spell changes lots of things. Firstly, it limits the paladin to 1 smite per turn, and it must be on his turn. This is the only part of the change I like. It also means that the paladin can't use any other bonus actions on the turn. It means the smite can be counterspelled. It also won't work if the paladin is for some reason unable to cast spells. This hurts a paladin barbarian multiclass because they can no longer smite while raging, which was really the only reason to play that multiclass. Under this rule, smiting is no longer necessarily the paladin's best option. There will definitely be times to smite, but also times when it isn't the best use of a spell slot or a bonus action. There are a few good things about this. It does discourage paladins from burning up all their power in one fight, and the 5e smite spells, like Wrathful Smite, no longer require concentration, and are cast just like Divine Smite. This makes these much better, and can be more useful than Divine Smite spell. Unfortunately, the new paladin's limited prepare spells make it hard to carry many of them. As it was in 5e, a paladin can use a Divine Focus to cast his spells, and it can be on a weapon or shield, letting him cast most spells even with his hands full. He gains Lay on Hands, which has only changed a little from 5e. He still has a pool of healing equal to 5 times his paladin level that he can spend to heal hit points. In D&D 2024, he can do this as a bonus action, which is a big improvement from 5e. He can spend 5 of these points to cure the poison condition instead of curing hit points. Unlike 5e, he can no longer cure disease with this ability, which is unfortunate. It almost never came up in games, and when it did, the paladin being able to cure it was nice, but it was great for roleplay. You find a village stricken by plague, the noble paladin goes around curing the stricken and bringing glory to his god. Lastly, he gains Weapon Mastery, which is a new mechanic. Every weapon now has a mastery property. If a character has mastered the weapon, they can use the mastery property when they hit an opponent. Each mastery property has a different effect. Paladins gain mastery of 2 weapons and can change 1 weapon mastery after a long rest. Our hero mastered the short sword, which has the Vex property. When he hits an opponent, he has advantage on all attacks against that opponent until the end of his next turn. This will be great for rogues who can reliably set up sneak attack, but it's good for anyone. He also masters the scimitar, which has the Nick property. In D&D 2024, dual wielding works pretty much the same as in 5e. If you make an attack with a light melee weapon, you can use your bonus action to make an attack with a weapon in the other hand. The Nick property lets you make the offhand attack as part of your attack action instead of using a bonus action. This is perfect for our character because he can make 2 attacks and still use a bonus action to cast Divine Smite. Using both masteries together, he will get his second attack with advantage if he hit with the first, and make both attacks with advantage on his next turn, and he can keep doing this as long as he keeps hitting with the short sword. This will be nice with Divine Favor, since he can add 1d4 to each attack, meaning after 2 turns, he will have added more damage than casting Divine Smite, and if the fight goes past 2 rounds, it just keeps adding value. His daggers also have the Nick property, and he could throw both if he had them in his hands. At 2nd level, he becomes a 2nd level paladin and gains a fighting style. Unlike 5e, a paladin can choose any fighting style, or choose Blessed Warrior and get 2 cleric cantrips. Our hero takes 2 weapon fighting. Now he can add his ability score modifier to the damage of his offhand attacks. At 1st level, he was doing comparable damage to a strength-based paladin with a greatsword, 2d6 plus his ability modifier. Now he can add his ability modifier to both attacks, doing a bit better damage. 2 attacks has benefits and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that he has 2 chances to miss, and if he misses 1 attack, he will do less damage than the greatsword wielder. The advantage is he also has 2 chances to hit, meaning that if he misses with 1, he still deals damage from 1 of his attacks. He also gains Paladin Smite, which means he always has Divine Smite prepared, and can cast it once per long rest without using a spell slot. Since he no longer needs to prepare Divine Smite, he will exchange it for Wrathful Smite, giving him options when smiting. He can also prepare an additional spell, and will choose Command because it's both powerful and versatile, and gives him an option other than attacking. In our game, we are already house ruling Paladin Smite to hopefully overcome some of the drawbacks. We are adding a line that says once on each of a Paladin's turns, they may cast Divine Smite without using an action. This will at least free up the Paladin's bonus action, and under the new spellcasting rules, it won't allow him to cast another leveled spell on his turn, so he won't be able to double smite by casting it again with his bonus action. This is still more limited than the 5e Divine Smite, but it does eliminate the worst part of the change. Another advantage of doing it this way is that if another class gets the Divine Smite spell in some way, they will still be limited to using it as a bonus action, confirming that smiting is a paladin thing, and other classes just don't do it as well.
At 3rd level, he becomes a 3rd level paladin and gains a channel divinity. This has been improved from 5e. Now a paladin gets 2 uses of channel divinity and can get 1 back every short rest, and both back after a long rest. This makes it much easier to use freely. His first use of channel divinity is Divine Sense, which used to be a class feature that didn't use channel divinity. Now when he uses it, he gains the ability to detect fiends, celestials, and undead for 10 minutes. While active, he knows the type and location of any of these creatures within 60 feet, and can also detect consecrated or desecrated areas and objects in the same range. This has improved from 5e in a subtle but very major way. It no longer says it isn't behind total cover. This turns it from an ability that was usually just fluff to something useful. Now he can tell if there is a demon in a room behind a locked door or an undead in a crypt beneath the floor. Before, unless the creature was invisible, this wasn't very useful because if they were a creature within 60 feet that wasn't behind total cover, you would probably just see it with your eyes. He also gets his subclass and takes an oath, choosing Oath of the Ancients. He is a woodsman by nature and very attuned to the forest and is very comfortable taking an oath to defend it. It gives him 2 more uses for his channel divinity. The first is Turn the Faithless, which hasn't changed from 5e. He presents his holy symbol, and Fae and fiends within 30 feet must make a wisdom save or be turned. There's a lot to the turn condition, and you should read it carefully in either version of the player's handbook, but essentially the creature can't move within 30 feet of you, can't take reactions, and the only action it can take is to dash to try to escape from you. If the creature has nowhere to move, it can take the dodge action instead. Also, if the creature is shape-shifted or concealed by an illusion, its true form is revealed while it is turned. Invisibility is an illusion that conceals the creature's true form, so it is particularly useful against creatures that rely on invisibility. The second channel divinity is Nature's Wrath, which has changed from 5e. As an action, he can use the channel divinity to conjure a spectral vines that reach out and grab creatures within 15 feet. It was 10 feet in 5e, and the creatures must make a strength saving throw or be restrained. In 5e, it could choose strength or dexterity for the save. A restrained creature gets a new save at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect if successful. The changes to this aren't large, but the extra 5 feet of range is nice, and now it is not giving them a choice on the saving throw. He also gets oath spells, which are always prepared and don't count against the number of spells he can prepare. His first level oath spells are Ensnaring Strike and Speak with Animals. Both are mostly the same as their 5e version, except that creatures large or larger have advantage on the strength save, and it is now cast as a bonus action immediately after hitting the target instead of casting it before attacking. It still requires concentration, but currently our hero doesn't have a good use for his concentration. He also gains a third first level spell slot and can prepare one more spell, and he chooses Shield of Faith as an alternative to his concentration that will improve his durability in combat. It could also be cast to protect an ally instead. At 4th level, he becomes a 4th level paladin, getting an ability score improvement or a feat, and he takes the Elven Accuracy feat. This doesn't appear in the new player's handbook, but the rule is that if it hasn't been changed in the 2024 rules, then the 5e version is usable. It lets him increase his dexterity to 18, and while he has an advantage on attack, he can reroll one of the dice, effectively having an extra advantage. With the Vex property on his short sword, he will frequently have advantage, making this exceptionally useful. This ability applies to any attack roll he makes that uses dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, so it can benefit from spell attacks if he has advantage on those. He can prepare one more spell, and he will prepare Thunderous Smite to give him even more flexibility when smiting. But you could also prepare Cure Wounds if you find that Lay on Hands and Healing Word aren't meeting your needs. At 5th level, he becomes a 5th level paladin. He gains extra attack, allowing him to make 2 attacks instead of 1 when taking the attack action. And when using 2 weapon fighting, he can now make 3 instead of 2. All of these attacks could benefit both from advantage and Elven Accuracy, and could also benefit from Divine Favor. Now he can deal 3 attacks that deal 1d6 plus his dexterity modifier. A paladin with a great sword can make 2 attacks dealing 2d6 plus his ability modifier. This gives the great sword wielder a slight advantage on both maximum and average damage, but only a few points. He also gets a Faithful Steed. He always has the Find Steed spell prepared, and it doesn't count against his prepared spells, and he can cast it once per long rest without using a spell slot. This is both fun and powerful. It takes us back to the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, where Paladin's mount was an important class feature. The mount itself is very good and has a stat block with good attacks and hit points. The new rules also fixed some of the problems with the mounted combat that 5e had. Now the mount shares the paladin's turn instead of going immediately after him on its initiative. This now allows the paladin to freely use his mount's mobility and attacks. This is how we have been playing it anyway, but it's nice that now it is official rules. The mount uses the level of the spell in several places in the stat block, so casting this with a higher level spell slot can be useful. The steed can appear as any large, rideable animal, and our hero prefers his to appear as a dire wolf. He can also choose Fey, Fiend, or Celestial when conjuring it, and it gives a special bonus action depending on what is chosen. Fiendish mounts gain Fell Glare, allowing it to frighten a creature. Celestial mounts gain Healing Touch, letting it heal a creature within 5 feet. Our hero prefers the Fey mount, which gets Face Step. It can teleport itself and its rider 60 feet to an unoccupied space. One problem I have seen is that it acts as a controlled mount, and these bonus actions aren't among the things a controlled mount can do. I'm sure it was intended to be able to use them, so this isn't really a problem, but rules as written, I don't think it can. The extra mobility is going to be very nice, especially with the teleport, and having a creature attack will also be very nice bump to damage. It also has some good out-of-combat uses as both a mount and a guard for camp. The steed lasts until it is reduced to 0 hit points or the paladin dies. He gains a 4th first-level spell slot and 2 second-level spell slots. He can prepare another spell for a total of 6 and can prepare second-level spells. If he prepared Thunderous Smite last level, he replaces it with Shining Smite and prepares Prayer of Healing now. If he prepared Cure Wounds last level, he replaces it with Prayer of Healing and prepares Shining Smite. His second level O spells are Moonbeam and Misty Step. Moonbeam is an interesting spell, dealing small but ongoing damage. It uses both concentration and his bonus action, so isn't always something he will want to do, but it still has its uses. Misty Step is of course excellent. A bonus action teleport is always something worth having, and is even worth conserving a spell slot just in case it is needed. His cantrips improve as well. Starry Wisp now deals 2d8 radiant damage.
The humans proved to be a terrible threat. They attacked seemingly without reason, just killing and looting. Their individual warriors weren't very strong compared to the knights of the elves, but they were great in number and heavily armored. The wizards were also low in skill compared to the ancient sages of his people, but their magic was devoted almost entirely to war and destruction. The humans lost dozens for each elf that fell, but the elves had few to lose while the humans were legion. The elves gradually gave ground and retreated into the deep woods. Our hero, along with the other elf knights, covered the withdrawal, making the humans pay a deadly price for attempting to follow. In time, a peace of sorts emerged. The humans, unable to pursue, turned to looting what the elves had left behind and settling the territory they had conquered. At 6th level, he becomes a 6th level paladin, gaining Aura of Protection, which hasn't changed significantly from 5e, and it's still one of the best reasons to be a paladin. Possibly the best now that Smite has been weakened. It creates a 10-foot aura, which is now called an emanation in the new rules, but does the same thing. An emanation is an effect that is tied to an individual or object, moves with that individual, and affects a specified radius. So in this case, exactly what it did before, which is to add the paladin's charisma modifier, minimum 1, to all friendly creatures within the emanation, which includes himself and his mount. His charisma modifier is currently +2, which is a nice boost to saving throws, but will obviously be better as his charisma increases. At 7th level, he becomes a 7th level paladin, getting Aura of Warding, which has changed a lot from the 5e version. It creates a 10-foot emanation that gives friendly creatures in it resistance to necrotic, radiant, and psychic damage. In 5e, it gave creatures in the aura resistance to damage from spells. I don't think this is either an upgrade or a downgrade. The old one protected from any damage type if it was caused by a spell, while the new one only protects against 3 damage types, but they're good ones to resist, and the resistance doesn't care what the source of the damage is. The two abilities are about equal in terms of power, and I think they also both have good flavor. I think I like the old one a little better because to me it gave the Oath of Ancients a Mage Slayer vibe, which was fun to roleplay, but I'm still perfectly happy with the change. He also gets a 3rd 2nd level spell slot, and can prepare another spell, and he prepares Lesser Restoration, making him even better at supporting his allies. If another party member doesn't have it, he might consider preparing Gentle Repose instead. This is a high enough level where the party can likely afford to have Revivify cast on a fallen ally, and Gentle Repose will give them 10 days to have this done instead of 1 minute. At 8th level, he becomes an 8th level paladin, getting another ability score improvement or feat. Technically, under the new rules, it's just a feat, and the feat is called Ability Score Improvement, and can be taken multiple times. So nothing has really changed, except that feats are now an official rule, not an optional rule, so they simplified things by making the Ability Score Improvement a feat. Also, most feats now come with a +1 to an ability score, so are going to be a more attractive option, but our hero needs to improve his charisma, so he takes Ability Score Improvement to move it from 14 to 16. At 9th level, he becomes a 9th level paladin, gaining Abjure Foes. He can present his holy symbol and expend a use of Channel Divinity. He then chooses a number of creatures equal to his charisma modifier, and they must make a wisdom save or be frightened of him for 1 minute, and while frightened in this way, they must choose to either move, take an action, or take a bonus action. They can't do more than 1 on a turn. This condition ends if they take damage. He gains 2 3rd level spell slots and can prepare another spell that can be of up to 3rd level. He replaces Wrathful Smite with Blinding Smite, and begins preparing to spell magic. Remove Curse and Revivify are both available to him at this level, but Remove Curse can usually wait until he can prepare it after a long rest, and since he or another party member will have Gentle Repose, Revivify can usually wait as well. At 10th level, he becomes a 10th level paladin, and gains Aura of Courage. While allies are in his aura of protection, they gain immunity to the frightened condition, and if a frightened ally enters the emanation, the frightened condition has no effect on that creature while it is there. The elves had begun to recover from the war with the humans. They had lost much, but the forest provides. New homes had been built, the land was rich with food, and the natural love of life the elves possessed has allowed them to be happy again, even after such a short time. It had only been 200 years since the war, but the elves had worked quickly. Their wizards had begun studying powerful destructive magic to be better prepared for battle. The youngsters were trained with sword and bow as they always have been, but now they are learning from battle-hardened veterans and are taught the ways of killing. The elven bards also helped the defenses, traveling far and wide seeking allies. The folk of the woods, the treants, dryads, satyrs, and centaurs all promised the elves their aid should the humans attack. And attack the humans did. They came with great fury. The elves weren't the only ones who had been preparing. The humans brought with them great war machines, and they also brought with them slave troops. Goblins and hobgoblins that the humans had conquered and forced to labor for them and to fight for them. The human wizards had also grown mighty. Their grasp of the arts had magnified over the course of a few short centuries. Still not as mighty as their elven counterparts, but they were a force to be reckoned with. The fighting was once again brutal. The elves fared better this time, their preparations and their allies made a difference, and rather than giving ground they held the humans at a stalemate that went from weeks to months. Each side would occasionally launch an attack, perhaps being repelled or perhaps gaining a little ground, but for the most part the lines held. Our hero was among the vanguard that led attacks against the humans. His elves were all veterans of the First War, and they were battle-hardened and ruthless. They and their Fey allies became a source of fear to the humans, appearing out of nowhere, killing many and fleeing into the woods before the humans could mount a response. In fear, the humans began building fortifications and keeping their troops together in large numbers, rather than the many smaller patrols they had preferred.
At 11th level, he becomes an 11th level paladin, gaining Radiant Strikes, which is mostly the same as the old improved Divine Smite with a few improvements. It still deals an extra 1d8 radiant damage on melee attacks, but will now also work with unarmed strikes. The other improvement is just the name. Improved Divine Smite just doesn't sound as cool as Radiant Strike. Now let's look at his melee damage again and see how he compares to a great sword wielding paladin. The great sword deals 2 attacks, each dealing 2d6 plus 1d8 plus ability modifier. We'll say 4, dealing a max damage of 48 and an average damage of 27. Our hero deals 3 attacks that each deal 1d6 plus 1d8 plus ability modifier of 4 and dealing a max damage of 54 and an average damage of 36. So once again, he's coming out ahead. He also gains a 3rd use of his channel divinity and a third level spell slot and can now prepare 2 spells, and he's going to prepare a few more smite options, taking Searing Smite and Thunderous Smite. His cantrips improve again, with Starry Wisp now dealing 3d8 radiant damage. At 12th level, he becomes a 12th level paladin, getting an ability score improvement or a feed, and he's going to increase his constitution to 16. At 13th level, he becomes a 13th level paladin. He gains a 4th level spell slot and can prepare 1 more spell of up to 4th level, and he prepares Banishment. He also trades Searing Smite or Thunderous Smite for Staggering Smite. This is one that is going to be very good, as it can stun an enemy, and that is usually better than the extra damage a 4th level Divine Smite would cause. At 14th level, he becomes a 14th level paladin, gaining Restoring Touch. Now he can spend 5 points from his pool of Lay on Hands to cure blinded, charmed, frightened, deafened, paralyzed, or stunned. This is great, making the paladin a Swiss Army knife of curing. He could trade Lesser Restoration for another spell if he wanted, because this can duplicate any of its effects. Picking up whatever smite spell you dropped last level would be good, but he could also pick up a party support spell like Aura of Vitality or Crusader's Mantle. At 15th level, he becomes a 15th level paladin, gaining Undying Sentinel, which has been improved from 5e. Originally once per long rest, when the paladin dropped to 0 hit points, he would drop to 1 hit points instead. Now when he does that, he also gains hit points equal to 3 times his paladin level. This is great. The old ability was good. Avoiding going down for a turn could often win a battle, but now he could potentially stay fighting for a few turns before going down, which will be a huge asset to his allies. He also gains a second 4th level spell slot and can prepare another spell of 4th level, and he prepares Locate Creature. There will be times when an enemy escapes him or he must locate someone who needs to be saved, and this will make it very easy.
The stalemate between the elves and humans went on for years. The elves and their allies caused great damage to the humans, but received many losses themselves. The humans seemed to have infinite resources. The elves could kill 100, and within weeks at least that many would march to the front. The human slave troops were even more numerous, but also proved to be the humans' undoing. Our hero gathered a group of his best scouts and infiltrators, and made their way into the human fortifications. He had done this many times, but this time he wasn't there to cause death and destruction. He was there to talk, but not with the humans. He went among the slave troops, first observing them and learning who the leaders were, then approaching them to talk of freedom and rebellion. He reminded the goblins and hobgoblins that while their people had often warred with the elves, neither side had tried to enslave or exterminate each other. He reminded them that, like elves, goblinkind had roots in the Feywild, unlike the humans. Over the next months, he orchestrated a slave revolt. His company of warriors hit the human encampment, openly surprising the humans, who were used to ambushes and raids from the elves. When the humans took the field of battle alongside their slave troops, they found the goblinkind supporting the elves instead. The humans weren't completely unprepared for this. Slavers never forget the possibility of slaves revolting. But our hero gave the humans no chance to crush the uprising. His wizards protected the goblins with veils of illusion, allowing them to flee the elven side. His warriors led a charge into the human ranks, stopping them from chasing the fleeing slaves. All told, over 2,000 goblins and hobgoblins defected to the elven cause, and hundreds of humans died in the process. At 16th level, he becomes a 16th level paladin, gaining a feat, and he takes the Inspiring Leader feat, increasing his charisma to 17, and gaining the ability to give his allies temporary hit points after a short or long rest. At 17th level, he becomes a 17th level paladin. He gains a 3rd, 4th level spell slot, and a 5th level spell slot, and can prepare 2 more spells. He prepares Destructive Wave, which is unchanged from 5e, and is one of the best area of effect damage spells in the game, and he prepares Circle of Power, which creates a 30-foot radius emanation that gives all friendly creatures advantage on saving throws versus spells and magical effects, and if these creatures succeed on a save against a spell or magical effect that lets them take half damage, they take no damage instead. The spell requires concentration and has a 10-minute duration. 10 minutes is an awkward duration because it's longer than you usually need for an encounter, but not long enough to extend to multiple encounters. This isn't always true, of course. In a dungeon adventure, you can definitely get use out of the duration, and it's also good in a military-style encounter where you are fighting waves of enemies. In any case, even if you only use it for one encounter, it's well worth the spell slot. His incantrips improve for a final time. Starry Wisp now deals 48 damage. At 18th level, he becomes an 18th level paladin, gaining Aura Expansion. His Aura Protection expands to a 30-foot emanation. This makes it much more useful. Until now, allies had to keep close to benefit, which made the party less mobile and more vulnerable to area of effect attacks. So there are lots of situations where the paladin and his mount are the only ones benefiting. But now it's much easier to maneuver your party and still keep everyone protected. This also matches the area of Circle of Power, letting him extend a multi-layered shield of protection around his allies. At 19th level, he becomes the 19th level paladin, gaining an Epic Boon. Epic Boons are a new sort of feat that is only available to 19th level characters, and they are much more powerful than typical feats. He chooses the Boon of Spell Recall. It increases his charisma to 18, and when he casts a spell of level 1 through 4, he rolls a d4, and if he rolls a number that matches the spell slot he used, he doesn't expend the spell slot. This will give him lots of extra smites, even if he only gets the benefit occasionally. He gains a 2nd, 5th level spell slot, and can prepare another spell, and he prepares Banishing Smite. If he won, he could stop preparing Banishment and trade it for something else. And at 20th level, he becomes a 20th level paladin, becoming an Elder Champion. As an action, once per long rest, he can take the form of an ancient force of nature. He assumes a primal appearance. Some examples are skin becoming bark-like or growing antlers. Our hero is going to grow fur and fangs of a wolf. The transformation lasts for 1 minute, and while transformed, he gains the following abilities. At the start of each of his turns, he gains 10 hit points. When he casts a paladin spell with a casting time of 1 action, he can cast it as a bonus action instead, and enemies have disadvantage on saves against his spells and channel divinity. The war continued for several years, but with the goblins on their side, the elves fared much better, gradually pushing the humans back. Given enough time, the elves might have driven the humans out of the forest entirely, but time wasn't something the humans were ready to give them. Knowing they were starting to lose the war, the humans launched a massive thrust against the heart of the forest, sending every soldier they had. The fighting was fierce, and our hero led the elven defense. Across the clearing, he saw what could only be the humans' leader. His armor was brightly painted and trimmed with gold, and he had a crown of iron and diamonds on his helmet. He was surrounded by human knights and standard bearers, and a wizard rode beside him. Our hero called his warband around him. His own wizard, a blade singer of great power, joined him. His riders rushed the human leader, firing arrows or spells as they closed the gap. A mighty treant accompanying his forces and began sweeping aside the human king's guardsmen. The battle became a wild melee, and our hero found himself face to face with the human king. Our hero assumed his primal form, and snarling like the great wolf he rode, he engaged the king in battle. The human was not unskilled, but he was no match for an elven warrior 10 times his age, but still young and strong. Swords flashed and crashed, but blow after blow he drove the human king to his knees. The human begged for mercy, and our hero granted it in exchange for surrender. The terms of surrender took a long time to negotiate, but in the end the humans left the elven woods except for the settlements they had built on the edges, and agreed to never enter the woods without invitation. They also were required to free all of their slaves, both human and otherwise. The elves asked no tribute and wanted none, seeking only peace. A few centuries later, our hero sat among the young warriors, telling the tales. The youngsters couldn't believe that their human friends were once such savages, but our hero assured them it was true. But not to judge. 300 years may be fleeting to an elven community, but it is many generations to a human. Empires rise and fall among them in less time. The humans that we know today have little connection to their barbaric ancestors. We hope you enjoyed this character. So far we like the changes to the Paladin class and the Oath of the Ancients. As we said, not all of the changes are perfect, but they are overall good. We're looking forward to playing with this new material, both in our D&D game and here on the Dungeon Crashers. Please let us know what you think in the comments, along with any questions, suggestions, or build ideas. And join us next time when we continue looking at the 2024 Player's Handbook with our take on a monk. Until then, cheers!